So at one point in this span of time, and I'm gonna jump to that particular night, actually. That night, so I left the Coins house. I drove home. Still, at this point in my life, I had always slept with the lights on, the fan, and the junk on the floor and stuff by the door, and you can make a whole song out of it probably. But I was when I got home and I went to bed that night. However, it worked, and I was able to sleep with the lights off, no TV or radio, the door wide open, the windows open. Ever since that point, and through the rest of my life, somehow being in that white realm, receiving that message, actually worked on a level that I couldn't even describe why that was happening. Somehow they felt it was important for me to be able to be at peace and to sleep at peace, and 20 years on, it worked. However it worked, I don't know, because at the time I didn't feel that it worked. I just felt scared and weirded out. So at another point in that span of time, they showed up in my bedroom late at night. This was before we had actually moved out of the house yet. And they had a young girl with them, and she was about 16, completely nude, but not in any sort of attractive way. She looked very emaciated and kind of sad and scared herself. And so I wake up and I see this hybrid girl, the first and only hybrid I've ever seen. I've seen her twice in my life, and this was the first time. And I see 3 grays behind her. I'm not feeling any fear, just confusion. And they're all just staring at me. And I'm like, okay, what's going on here? And they were just, I could tell that the 3 little grays were watching me, seeing what I would do next. And I go, what's her name? And they said, yes, what's her name? Like they wanted me to name her. So I thought, I'll give her a nice, friendly name, Angel. And they're like, yay! In their sort of telepathic, little happy fireworks flashy way where they actually just stand there, but you can tell they're really delighted. And so I'm like, okay, Angel, okay. What's next? And she just stood there just completely embarrassed and didn't want to be there at all. And then they blinked out, and I went back to sleep. And I don't know if it was for my benefit that they brought her as a friend, or for their benefit to try to maybe she was raised on board and they wanted to get her out on the town and maybe meet people. I have no idea what that was about, but clearly she was very uncomfortable with the whole situation. She wasn't doing this of her own volition. They just brought her with them. Okay. So, fast forwarding a little bit, so for years, I couldn't date. There was nothing in me that could connect with another individual. My friendship with Kyle got back on track eventually because he wasn't the worst of it. He only dated her after I dated her. My friend Don, that would eventually come around too, but several years after the events that I'm about to tell you. My friend Herb, he and I never became friends again. He was actually quite proud of the fact that he was dating her behind my back, and I guess he even wrote a song about it. and I got to hear it once, and he's like, "Oh, you got your head in a cloud, but I got your girl, and now it's me who's proud," or something. Just terrible. Just a terrible song. I'm like, you can't go back to friendship with a guy like writes a song like that. Our mutual friend John, who had a cabin up in Lewiston, Michigan, on occasion he would invite whomever of his friends, say, "Hey, I'm doing a cabin weekend this particular weekend. How'd you like to come up?" And whoever was available would come up. And as it had happened, that Vicky and I never selected the same weekend to go up. It just so happened that way. But John asked me, "Hey, he puts out his invitation." And I said, "Yes, I'll come up to the cabin." And Vicky says, yes, I'll come up to the cabin. And I'm like, oh, this is not good. But should I back out? I'm like, no, she'll blink. She'll back out. Neither of us backed out. And so we went, she was actually married by this time. And I had heard only unpleasant things about her husband, but I was only to find out that it was even worse than I had imagined. So we go up to John's cabin. There was an extended group of friends there. It wasn't just John and myself and Vicky and her new husband. But it was winter, and so they didn't have the water running. If you wanted to go to the bathroom, you had to use the outhouse. And the bathroom wasn't being used for anything, and there was a distinct lack of space in this small cabin, so I slept in the bathroom. I got some of the lawn furniture cushions, put it in the bathtub, and that was my bed. And it was quite cold in there because they also didn't heat the bathroom, so I had several layers on. But the weekend, so Vicky's husband was a complete jackass. He was just a real character. He would say, oh, what do you do for work? And then put down whatever anybody said that they did for a living at that point. Very rude. And then when it came to ask him, oh, what do you do for a living? He said, oh, I work with computers, and that's all he would tell people. Come to find out later, his computer was registered at a fast food restaurant. No shame in working at a fast food place, but don't tell people that you work with computers. And he insisted on being shirtless pretty much the whole weekend. And some people can get away with that. This guy, no way should he have had his shirt off even for a blink of an eye. It was not right. It was not right. And he would do other things, like we had soup, and after he was done eating all the food out of the soup bowl, he dumped the broth back into the soup pot. He asked, we needed to go on a beer run, and he said, I'll do it. And so we gave him the money, and he goes, can I keep the change? And our friend John says, sure, whatever, this is the type of beer we want. We specifically gave him, whatever beer brand we wanted. And he comes back with the cheapest beer that the place had. And so John says, we told you what kind of beer they wanted. Did they have it? And he's like, yeah, but this was a cheaper beer, and that way I get to keep more of the money, because you said I could keep the change. So this was the type of guy that my previous sweetheart was now married to. And it was a small cabin, and obviously winter, and you can't really get away from that. So as they were a couple, he insisted on taking the largest bed in the cabin, which normally was reserved for John. It's his cabin, obviously he gets the nice bed. But no, Vicky's husband insisted that they take it because they were a couple and they needed that slightly bigger bed. So John acquiesced, being a good host. Well, the thing is that this bedroom was on the other side of the wall of the bathroom where I'm sleeping. So late that night, I'm sleeping, and this is, to give you a time frame, this is the beginning of 95 actually at this point. It's January of 1995. And I'm sleeping in the bathtub, and I suddenly hear, I'm like, no, that's not what I think I hear. I'm like, no, and they're getting amorous with each other, and I'm like, I do not want to hear this. This is not right. And then they start talking to each other, kind of dirty, and I'm like, what the heck? I'm in this bathtub up north with this woman that I despise and her husband that I now despise even more, and they're sweet talking on the other side of this. I'm like, this is so completely absurd. And then I just start laughing, crying with laughter. I'm in the tub. It's like this uproarious laughter. And I feel all this weight lifting off me. And I'm like, I don't want to wake everybody up. I gotta get out of here. So I go running out of the cabin, and I'm just laughing my full head off. And I go running through the woods. And I come to this other road that is somewhere near the cabin that I've never been on before. And I'm just still going down the road, just laughing and being silly. And then I run out of breath a little bit, so I'm walking down the road, and I'm like, no way. And I see that very exact house I had seen back that one morning 4 years earlier. There was no doubt this was exactly the house. I had never seen it before anywhere outside of that dream, if you want to call it that. And I was like, holy cow. And I'm like, should I walk back? I'm like, well, I'm here now. And I continued to walk, nothing in front of the house. It was gone. And then I realized that from this particular point in time, one way I like to look at it is that they sent a message back to me 4 years earlier and said, when you find yourself in this particular place, at whatever particular time you get here, that is when this weight will be lifted. That is when you will be able to live again. But we want to give you a warning that some bad stuff is on the way. And I realized, and then from that point, I didn't care about her, and I was normalized. I was just completely fine again after that. That dark spell that was over me for several years was now gone when I actually arrived at this place. And I mean, it was a very memorable event the first time it happened, and so when I got there, I knew exactly where I was. And I'm like, this was a 4-year period that all of this just happened. And they were watching this whole situation, and they seemed to actually care about what was happening to me. I'm like, that is a lot different than, oh, we just took you in the middle of the night, we did this operation on you and dumped you back. For some reason, this was important enough for them to participate in my life and basically give me the message that they were watching over me and they were concerned about me during this period of time. And there's one more event after that. In March of '95, just a couple months later, I met this wonderful girl, Tammy, and we connected very quickly, effortlessly, and it was May at the point of this particular event that I'm about to describe. And she and I were hitting it off really well. And there comes a point in a time of a relationship, if you're an experiencer, how do you break it to the person you're dating what's been happening to you? And it starts to weigh on you a little bit, like at some point I'm just going to have to tell her, maybe break the ice and say, have you ever seen any UFO shows on TV, that sort of a thing? But this was going so well, and this was my first relationship after several years. So I'm like, I don't want to blow it. And I kept putting it off, putting out the feelers about how she felt about even the UFO phenomena in general. So come May '95, these pictures that you see are from the very exact day of the event. She and I, Tammy and I, went to a local park, and we went walking around, hiking around, and as the sun started to come down, I actually don't remember whose idea it was to stargaze rather than leave, but we found a hill, and I scouted it out and said, yeah, this is a good hill to do some stargazing. And so she says, cool. And so as she started to climb the hill, I took this picture. So this is her actually climbing up the hill that we were on. And we set out the blanket that we had for picnic purposes that was in one of our backpacks. And we're laying there, and we watched the stars for as long as that was interesting to us, a few seconds, and then started the smooching, and so we were like laying there doing the smooching thing. And then the sun went down, and it was dark, and so we're up on this hill. And then all of a sudden, it got very quiet. All of the sounds in the woods around us just completely stopped. I'm like, okay, that's kind of odd. And then I hear these footsteps come walking up the hill. Very distinct, very human-sounding footsteps. I'm like, oh no. Oh no, not now, not now, not here, not like this. You know, I haven't even touched on the subject with her. So I got kind of nervous, and so I said, oh yeah, I just need to get up and, you know, let's stand up, you know. So we go and we walk up to a part of the hill, and as we're kind of looking up at the sky, she says, oh, look, it's the Big Dipper. And I said, oh, no, actually, that's the Little Dipper. I just learned that in an astronomy class I had. And it was the earliest college, and I'm telling her this, it was the earliest college class I've ever had. It was so early in the morning that I could barely stay awake, and I kept the best notes I had in any class ever. And that's how I know what the stars are in the sky now. And she's like, oh, that's very interesting. And then we got into a conversation about how pricey college books were at that time. And then I'm like, okay, things seem sort of normal now. Maybe it was just an overactive imagination. So we lay back on the blanket and we start to smooching again. And then all of a sudden it gets very quiet. And then I hear footsteps coming up the hill. And I'm like, but my reaction wasn't, oh, not again. My reaction was, that seems familiar. I didn't remember that, but this is a very difficult thing to explain, how this scene played out. But to me, it was more of a feeling of deja vu. I did not distinctly remember that we had just done this. So I said, oh, maybe we should get up, stand up. And so she and I stand up, and she says, look, it's the Big Dipper. And I'm like, that seems familiar. And so I said, that's the Little Dipper, etc., etc. College book discussion. Oh, it's quiet. Oh, let's go lay back down in the blanket. Smooch, smooch. Oh, it's quiet. Oh, footsteps coming up the hill. Get up. And so went up to the top of the hill again, and I'm like, this is really odd. Okay. This seems really familiar. And she goes, look, that's the Big Dipper. I'm like, no, that's the Little Dipper. And then we're talking about the price of books again. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, we just totally had this discussion twice already. This is, you know? And then I'm like, we gotta get out of here. But suddenly we were both paralyzed, staring at each other. And of course, who comes to the party? These three little gray guys walk right up to us and surround us, and they approach her. They don't approach me, they approach her. And again, I have not told her a single thing about my background like this. And they're staring up and down at her like, like they're inspecting her very closely, and they're looking at each other, and they're not even looking at me. And then I could overhear their telepathic banter, and they're like, no, not her. No, she's not the one. No, we don't like this one. And then they slowly walk down the hill, and they're on their way. And then we could move again, and boy, did we move. We grabbed our stuff, which is right there, and we ran to the very edge. They were gone long. These little guys were long gone by this point. We hightailed it to the edge of the park. We ran, and didn't look back, hopped in the car, sped away. And as we were driving home, which is about a 45-minute drive from there, we were just completely quiet. We didn't talk to each other for the longest time. We just sort of stared ahead. And as we started to get closer to home, I'm like, do you want me to drop you off home now? And she's like, no. I'm like, what should we do? And she's like, I don't know. So we drove into the Meijer parking lot. I had an idea. It was actually turned out to be a good idea. We drove into the Meijer parking lot. If you're familiar with Meijer, it's a big Walmart-style store. And they are open 24 hours, and it was quite late at that point. I have no idea about the exact passage of time during this. But we walked into Meijer, and we started picking up things like pens, balls of yarn, looking at it, toys. We went up and down all the aisles, picking up these consumerist comforts and signs of basically human civilization almost, to ground us, to comfort us. And then we sat They had a pet aisle at the time, and we watched the hamsters on their wheel and whatever for I don't know how long, until we sort of came down, and then I dropped her off at home. Very quickly after that, she broke up. We never discussed what had happened after that. Not a single word about it. And although I don't know that she knew what had happened had anything to do with me, I think I know she knew that it had everything to do with me on the hill. And that pretty much busted up the relationship there. Thanks, guys. So, January 6th, 1996. This is just a little postscript to the story. I looked at my horoscope that day. I very rarely did, but interestingly, I assumed January 6th was the anniversary of that Dear John letter back in 1991. Come to find out it was January 7th, but for the point of this story, me believing that it was January 6th actually, I guess, has some meaning. I looked at my horoscope, which I didn't normally do, and it says you'll be reunited with an old friend, avoid any risky business ventures, and a new romantic interest will appear. It said all of these things. So I'm like, okay. And very shortly after that, my friend Kyle, who I hadn't spoken to in several months, we were just doing our own thing, and it was unusual for us to be out of touch for that long. He calls and says, oh, hey, do you want to do laser tag tonight with these friends of mine from college? I said, sure, that's fine. So we went out and played laser tag and left and came back to a restaurant after to eat. And his college buddy says, are you familiar with long distance plans that you can actually start your own business and get other people on board? And I'm like, oh, this is that risky business venture, okay. And so I can check two things off of this. But I'm like, at this point, it's like 10:30 p.m. or whatever. I'm like, there's only an hour and a half for this romantic interest to appear. So the waitress comes up, and she says, hi, I'm Becky, I'll be your server. I'm like, I know you. You're the sister of this other friend of ours. And she's like, yeah. And I know that, interestingly, our friend John had put out his annual It's Wintertime, Come Up to My Cabin invite. And I know her older brother often gets invited to the same cabin, and that she has tagged along in the past. So I said, hey, are you going to John's cabin this year? And she goes, well, I wasn't really thinking about it. And I said, oh, you should. Just like, you should. And so she leaves, and she comes back, and she goes, yeah, I got the day off. I'm like, what? So anyway, so we go up to John's cabin. Here's her and I first picture together. It turned out that new romantic interest paid off. We eventually got married, and are still married, and now have 2 munchkins. Interestingly, the gentleman that married us is an experiencer by the name of David Kaywood, who has now left us earth too. He was certified to be able to conduct marriages, so I thought that was super cool to be married by a brother experiencer. And rewinding back to that visit to John's cabin in January of 1996, that is where my wife and I had our first kiss. Coincidence? I don't know. So I want to say that this span of time that I had in my early 20s, I've been dying to tell this story, so please forgive me telling these awkward stories from my younger days, but there isn't any way for me to have explained the relevance of that time loop that I was in, that I had on the hill, nor the regression session that I had where I actually stepped out of time and the entities, whatever they are, consoled me, nor that strange thing that I like to call time travel, because I don't know how better to explain how I found myself in this place twice and under such unusual circumstances. I do think that they can often show long-term interest. I think they intended my wife and I to be together for whatever reason. Several psychics have told my wife and I ever since we started dating that we were going to have 2 kids, and we were just like, we're not ever going to have kids. And eventually, of course, we had 2 kids. So for some reason, and I can't explain why on earth they would think that's important, as Keith said, they're not going to come all this way to screw up people's governmental systems. I mean, why on earth would they come all this way to make sure some schlep from the Detroit area, lands on his feet after a rough breakup? I have no idea, but it was some sort of a long-term interest they had. And I think all through my life, for whatever reason, they've been participatory. And I can't think of any really reasonable reason for that. And I have seen it in many other people's lives too. These types of stories, it takes a long time to unpack a story like this. So I appreciate your patience of me being able to do it. And really, I've been waiting to tell this story for so long. The library talks I do, where I give the usual UFO 101 talks, I can't begin to describe anything like this. So I needed to sort of have a home field advantage when I finally got this story out. And so it's been really special for me to be able to share such a weird span of time. But right now, of course, that first bunch of stuff I talked about is in my book. Please buy my book. It's good. Yay. It's only $10. And if you buy it on Amazon, it's like $12.95 or something, whatever they want to charge for it. So obviously cheaper here. And for the next phase of my life, I was going to put out a second book, which covered basically the material I spoke about today, but having a wife and 2 kids makes it difficult to tell a story like this. It was like, oh, Dad put out a book, cool, what's it about? Oh, I have girlfriends, right? So basically what I'm doing is releasing the information episodically in my newsletter, my personal newsletter. It's called Experiencer Chronicle. What I've done is every quarter I put out a new one, and it includes the next chapter in this sort of story to sort of meet it out and not have like this something as auspicious of a book as a book out there. And I also include in it, several people have come and told me stories saying, here's an interesting story, I just thought people should know about it. So I include other people's accounts. If you have an account of something interesting that happened to you, take a look at my newsletter. It's free online at experiencer.us. And if you like what you see, feel free to contribute something yourself. I release everything and with anonymity. So in any case, I hope you like it, because I will continue to tell the unusual things that happened to me in it. Thanks so very much.